as you just heard at the end of that session, Trevor kind of wrapped up by talking about some trends in AI and an expected focus on agentic AI in the industry ahead of us. And we've seen a lot of development in that space. We've run sessions on demystifying AI like this before. And for that reason, we're going to focus on agentic AI over the next 30 minutes or so. So up on the screen, we've used a timeline like this before, especially over on the left-hand side of the screen, kind of that box leading us up to the explosion of interest in large language models, kind of the proliferation of AI in all of our lives, I would imagine, starting in the early 2020s. If you think back to that time, back to the early 2020s, you'll remember a lot of excitement around these models and that they might be able to be applied kind of across the enterprise, but not being entirely sure on what that might look like, how it's going to work. And we thought at that point it was pretty useful to try to demystify AI as a whole, not get into every single technical detail, but get a good handle on what it is, how it works, and importantly, how we can make use of it in our organizations. And what's happened since then? So what's over the right-hand side of the box? There's been a coming of age, if you will, of agentic AI kind of starting in 2024. And that's been bolstered by the development and release of a number of new models. So OpenAI releasing their O1 reasoning model in September of 24. DeepSeek, Trevor referenced, causing a bit of a stir in releasing their R1 reasoning model in early January. Just before that, actually, Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, declared this the age of agentic AI. And that kind of brings us up to the present. Lots of details in between all those things, and we'll talk about some of them in the session, but brings us up to the present day where we're thinking about, across industries, how can we actually apply agentic AI? So the first question that raises, of course, is what is agentic AI? And different vendors will give different definitions. They'll introduce their own terms like multi-agentic or compound AI. Obviously, NVIDIA, a pretty major player in this space, they've described it in this way in a blog post. The next frontier of artificial intelligence is agentic AI, which uses sophisticated reasoning and iterative planning to autonomously solve complex, multi-step problems. And it's set to enhance productivity and operations across industries. Well, why have we chosen this definition? This is probably one of the broader ones, and for this session, rather than getting too caught up in what's in the club, what's not in the club of agentic AI, we want to take that broader look at it, focus more on a little bit of an understanding of the technologies, as well as how we can apply them to drive some business value. So in that way, the definition focuses more on what it is that we're trying to accomplish, which is autonomously solving complex, multi-step problems. I talked about the early 2020s when we were kind of getting a little bit more familiar with a number of these large language models, starting to apply ChatGPT and others. And we could see this little bit of a limitation around this type of complex reasoning. And that's what there's been a ton of advancement in over the last year or two, and what we'll focus on for the next 25, 30 minutes or so. I think the final thing that's pretty helpful about the definition is that last sentence. It's set to enhance productivity and operations across industries. Again, something Trevor referenced of making sure that we're staying locked on to business goals, business value. The technology is interesting, but how can it bring us tangible value? So people familiar with Thorogood, I'm sure have seen this, an image like this before, or if you haven't, you weren't paying attention in the last session. And we've used it recently in thinking about the application of large language models when they came out a couple of years ago. And we've been thinking about those as one of a collection of tools that we can use kind of depending on business cases, depending on the data assets that we have in our organizations. And large language models opened up a range of possibilities, from evolving how we can explore over on the left-hand side, how we can explore and understand and interact with our data. So things like chat, natural language, content generation, a number of those, as well as over on the data source side, thinking about enriching our data. So how can we kind of expand and enrich those data assets throughout our organization? So in one sense, large language models are another tool in the toolbox. In another, they can broaden our horizons on how we can be thinking about all of these tools and how we can think about designing at appropriate levels of complexity, technical complexity, to match the business case, match the data. So they're kind of both additive and multiplicative. Additive in the sense that it's adding another tool into our toolbox. Multiplicative in the sense that they're enhancing the contribution of all of the other tools or approaches or whatever you want to call them in the middle of the screen. So I talked about data enrichment, or Brendan later in the day will talk about attribute mapping using AI. So how it can kind of play across a number of different areas in data flowing throughout our organization. And importantly, the systems that we build aren't just large language models or AI models or whatever other technology on the screen deployed individually. Where we build solutions that actually bring real business value, they're compound systems that kind of bring in multiple of these components and bring them together. So a solid foundation of data and data ingestion, data modeling, transformation, visualization on top of that, maybe machine learning models, all the way through potentially including AI. You wouldn't take any one of these tools or approaches in isolation, is what I'm trying to say. You'd think about your tool set, you'd think about the business case, and you'd think about how the tools can build on each other in order to bring those two ends into the middle. And Agentic AI is just that. It's another tool in our toolbox that expands upon and has the ability to amplify the contributions of a variety of the other tools that are in our toolbox. So Agentic AI, maybe 2 years ago, with the earlier generations of large language models, while impressive, they hadn't yet reached that level of controlling workflows to answer more complex questions. You could kind of feed them a series of documents. You could start with just basic chat interaction. You could enhance that a bit, feed in a series of documents, feed them other data sets, kind of that retrieval augmented generation approach. And you could ask, whatever question, and here's some information to help you answer that question. But the model capability wasn't really at a level for the model itself to decide, actually the answer is not in these documents, it's not in this data, but if I could filter the data some other way, if I could bring in this other source, if I could access this enterprise data source that we have, that would really help me answer. Or maybe I need to go back to the user and ask for a little bit more context. That type of workflow, that autonomously solving of complex multi-step problems that we saw at the beginning. And that's what Agentic AI is working toward. That's what the new tool in our toolbox can do. So all of that's to say is everything else in the toolbox now irrelevant because we have Agentic AI. Not in the slightest. If anything, it makes all of those other tools, all of those other pieces even more important because the range of problems that we can solve and how we can approach those problems just got a whole lot wider. So we have to make sure that we have those pieces right in order to do it. So it's always kind of risky territory trying to define something because people will disagree with your definition no matter what you put out. In this case, what exactly is or isn't Agentic AI? But to help, I'll try to put it in the context of patterns we've probably seen before, the large language model interaction pattern that I talked about. I'd bet you'd be pretty hard pressed to find someone in this room who hasn't in some manner incorporated large language models into their working or even their personal lives. Trevor, in fact, has a trip coming up where much of his itinerary has been planned by generative AI, so safe travels. So what does this look like? Not Trevor's itinerary. What does the large language model process flow look like? You can ask Trevor about his itinerary over lunch. We have our users, which is all of us, our large language models. So think OpenAI's ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude or a number of others. And we have some sort of interface that sits in the middle. So this could be, your web browser in kind of the most basic sense of interaction with these models. It can be through desktop tools, which we'll see a little bit, integration into IDEs, integration into actual like data flows throughout our organization. So a number of different things that can bring the users and the large language models together. We can give prompts to these models. We can also add in some more context for the models to answer the questions a bit more intelligently. And our model will kind of chew on that information and give us a response. So what does Agentic AI do differently? Well, we still have our users. We still have our interface. Just for this diagram, I've made that a web application, but again, it can be a number of different tools. And we still have that large AI model that we're interacting with. Here it's labeled an orchestrator for the diagram. But in practice, we'll still commonly use a lot of those big general purpose large language models as the orchestrator of an agentic AI system. And there's been a bit of development in that area too, a bit of fine tuning or retraining of these models to focus on that like reasoning, that kind of workflow type process instead of purely chat interaction. But this is where agentic AI starts to differ from that large language model process, which is the introduction of a number of supplementary tools, if you will, to help the model think through things, take different approaches. It's giving the orchestrator license to phone a friend, draw upon additional tooling to provide better analyses, more thoughtful answers, hopefully better solutions. Interestingly, we can leave a lot of this decision-making up to the orchestrator itself as well. So we're equipping it with all these tools. And we don't even need to always say, use this tool for this thing, use this tool for that thing. You must use it in these instances and never in these. We can provide some of those guardrails if we want. But we can also allow the orchestrator to do some of that decision-making to get to a point in its logical flow and realize it would be great to be able to pull in another data set. I can execute a SQL query on one of our enterprise data sources, or we have a visualization in our reporting suite built out to answer this type of thing. Let me bring that in as well to respond to this. It can also go back to us for more information if there are further inputs that might help refine its approach. And all of this is in the process of coming back to us with the best output it possibly can produce. So this whole bottom portion of the screen, the orchestrator, the tooling, the connectivity, the logical flow, that's what we're talking about when we say agentic AI. So let's take a look at a demo to help this feel a little bit more real. For the sake of the demo, consider me someone working at a confectionery manufacturer. In particular, I work in the finance department, let's say, and I focus on accounts payable. So I'm receiving vendor invoices, I'm validating invoices, I'm figuring out what to do with payments, everything associated with that. In fact, in our organization, we have a set of standard operating procedures for the finance team. So there'd be a lot of work in understanding what's in those flows, how do you make certain decisions, how do I connect to finance or supplier management systems and incorporate those into the decisions that I need to make. And these are all decisions that can have real impact on the financial well-being of the company. So really important decisions to make. I will open up now Claude Desktop. So similar interface to just interacting with a large language model in your browser, a little bit more functionality that you can add into the desktop tool, but think the same thing. It's just a UI sitting on top of one of these models. Let me find my mouse. And I can interact with it in the same way that we've been interacting with large language models a lot. I can say, write me a sentence about accounts payable. I'll add in please for my future well-being. And it will sit with that for a second. It'll kind of come back to us with a response. Accounts payable represents the money a company owes to its suppliers and vendors, goods and services, et cetera. So pretty simple interaction. But in this same interface, we can operate in that kind of workflow type process. What if I have something a lot more complex that I want to ask of this model? So I mentioned I'm in accounts payable, and I've just gotten a vendor invoice. So I said I work for a confectionery manufacturer, Sweet Dreams Chocolate Company, looks like. And we've gotten this invoice from one of our suppliers that provides packaging materials for us to package up our products, ship them, et cetera. So we can see some information at the bottom of the invoice of the items provided on chocolate bar wrappers and cardboard display boxes and shipping cartons. And up at the top, lots of information on the vendor and their information, the payment due date, when it was issued, the vendor ID, the purchase order number, who the contact in our organization is. Reasonably well organized, the invoice. A person looking at it could probably figure out what all these data points mean. If you needed to programmatically do it just by saying this piece of information lives here, that might be a little bit tougher to do. Looks like some semblance of a table down at the bottom that we could probably pick up on. So semi-structured, we'll call it, but not perfectly structured. And there's definitely a challenge around invoices in that every vendor has their own format. They come through as PDFs, so you have no idea. They themselves are going to change them all the time. Across vendors, you'll get 20 different formats, and people will call different things different things. So anyway, we've gotten this invoice, and I could work through it manually, or I could develop an Agentic AI tool to support this accounts payable function. So what we've done is built out a number of tools that address some of the common problems within the accounts payable department, and we've equipped this Agentic AI model with those tools so that it can figure out, okay, you're asking me to do this thing. Let me draw upon these tools in order to answer the question. So I'll say, process this invoice, please. And I have just a downloaded copy of the invoice, so I'll upload that, and I'll send that off to the model. And again, it'll chew on it for a second, but it'll pretty quickly realize you're not just asking for chat interaction here. You're asking me to do something that I have a number of tools that can help me. So the model is saying, first thing I had better do is review the invoice processing SOP. So it makes a call out to a system within the organization, maybe SharePoint where we have policies saved or something like that, gets that invoice review SOP where it has a number of steps that it should follow, decisions that it should make, kind of cutoffs of where it should decide certain things. It's picked up on the existence of a purchase order within that invoice, which we saw, or a purchase order number within the invoice. And we have a system, maybe a supplier management system or something internally that has more information about those purchase orders, not just the number, but when is it valid till? How much value is allowed to be allocated to that purchase order? Who are some of the internal contacts that are approvers on the PO? So recognizing that purchase order number exists within the invoice and realizing it's going to be important to bring in some of this internal context. Also getting vendor details looks similar, but pulling back some information from an internal system or supplier management system based on the vendor number that's in the invoice. And then it realizes, let me make sure that these two things line up. Let me make sure in our internal systems that this vendor is approved to invoice against this purchase order, and a little bit of work done on that. It's quickly determined, yep, that's the right vendor for the purchase order number provided. But actually, it's found an issue here. It's realized that the purchase order number is associated with a purchase order that expires on May 30th, and this supplier sent through an invoice to us on May 31st. So they're trying to invoice against a purchase order that was expired at the time. So a little bit of an issue. Purchase order is no longer valid. Also another formatting issue or something of their invoice in that it doesn't have a specific invoice number, and we've asked for that within our finance SOPs. And it kind of continues on working through the things that it wants to check in checking vendor information and checking approver, validation, all those types of things. And it looks like most of the stuff is okay, but because of the issue with the purchase order expiration, it's realized I shouldn't move ahead in processing this purchase order. It's then sending an email, sending an email out to the contact. So it might look this up in our organizational directory, get contact info for the approved internal approver on that purchase order and is reaching out to them with some summary information about what has gone on here. We've gotten an invoice. The invoice is dated May 31st. The PO expired on the 30th. It was invalid. There's also no invoice number on it. You have to resolve this. Think about either requesting a new purchase order or, what does that say? Amended invoice with proper invoice number. And these aren't things that we've built into the model saying, here is the email that you need to send. It's taking in its own context of if you will, of the process that it's followed, the things that it's found over the course of that process, and realize what the relevant information is going to be that it'll share back with the contact, and whether or not it should move ahead according to the finance SOPs, given some of the things that it's found within that purchase order. Right. So, getting back to our slides, hopefully it was a little bit of an interesting demo, a little bit of a taste for things that could be involved in Agentic AI. But again, it was in a desktop client. We kind of built in, I guess, flipping back to the demo, we built in some of that functionality as integrations. So you can see like the invoice audit integrations where it has a number of those tools equipped that I can call upon. So a little bit of a sense for Agentic AI. But when we design Agentic AI systems, it's not just tool calling. There are a number of important patterns, approaches, functionality, other design considerations that make up what we really consider to be Agentic AI. One of those patterns is tool calling, like I said, and we'll talk about that more for a minute here. But again, it's one in terms of the broader design of Agentic AI systems, and there are a variety of other components that we'll continue to work through over the course of this session. So tool calling, it's really the enhancing of our systems through giving them this ability to take action outside of just consideration of our prompt and the context that we've passed it within the prompt and whatever exists within the model itself. So that might be accessing enterprise data, might be retrieving documents, searching the web, things like going to our financial and supplier management systems, reading our finance SOPs, bringing in more information beyond what we've shared with it so far, as well as the ability to take action. So we saw in that demo sending emails. We could raise tickets. We could execute some additional automated workflows that exist within our organization. So basically anything that you can imagine that you could code or that you could add into one of these tools or into one of these Agentic AI systems as another tool, that's all possible under taking action. More generally, the high-level pattern for tool use within Agentic AI is trying to understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and in some cases, building out or definitely curating a relevant set of tools for that system to use. We can think of these tools like function calls, and then we'll grant access to those tools to the model to be able to execute these functions. And then we can also, like I said, give the model some autonomy. We allow it to decide whether it's appropriate to use, in what order, what combination of tools are appropriate to solve this kind of complex reasoning problem. A technical piece, I guess, but a pretty important development that's enabled this tool calling is Model Context Protocol, MCP. This was first introduced by Anthropic near the end of last year. Since then, OpenAI have also announced support. Microsoft, AWS, Google, they all have built out instructions for how to apply MCP within their tools. So it's definitely expanding as far as adoption within the industry. What is it? It is an open standard for communication. So it is the communication pattern, not the pattern, but it is a communication pattern that allows communication between models and tools and context and in between all of those. If we think about what things used to look like before having a bit more of a standard on communication between tools and context, AI models kind of all have their own APIs. So we could think about, oh, well, I want to build in this tool as long as the model allows being augmented with tools. I want to build in this tool. I want to give it the ability to call out to a model, call out to a function, something like that. And like I said, they each have their own APIs, kind of each have their own structures and formats and whatever within those APIs. So if we think about building out an agentic AI system, we can kind of custom design tools for that system. Then when we want to build another that uses a different AI model, you need to rethink what that communication looks like because of differences in API structure and everything like that. So kind of hurts that reusability thing that Trevor was talking about, where we want the ability to be able to choose across a wide range of AI models that might match our business case, maybe for price or performance or availability or whatever it is. We want that ability to upgrade them over time. So this adherence to a standard set of communication protocols really enables that. It also allows us to reuse tools. So if you build out a tool that can interact with one model, that's good. If you build out a tool that can interact with every model because it's based on that open standard of communication, then if we think back to that demo, we were sending emails, we were accessing internal systems, we were looking up information in our policies, all those types of things. Really commonly used functions within an organization. You can imagine those being a part of many different AI or agentic AI systems that you would build out. So that reusability is going to be really important, really cut down on a lot of manual effort. Like I said, there are important patterns beyond tool calling as well. So the next three on the screen, planning, review, and memory, I think are really interesting. They differ a bit from tool calling in that they're not just adding more components into the architecture, but they focus a little bit more on how to help the agentic AI system think, if you will, and solve problems in more holistic ways. So what is planning? You can probably make a pretty good guess on what planning is based on the name. But let's think about any type of non-trivial problem that we're going to solve ourselves. Do you, from the start, just sit down and say, I already know the answer, I'm just going to start typing it up? Probably not. You'll probably come up with some sort of outline. You'll think about how am I going to organize coming to a decision? What are key topics that I want to make sure that I consider? What are key decisions that I'm going to need to make over the course of this process? What pieces of information, what outside research is going to help me make this decision? Come up with a little bit of a plan to figure out how you'll tackle this problem. And that's the same thing that's implemented in many agentic AI systems. The user inputs prompts, and rather than immediately trying to start writing out an answer, the model will take a second to think about and design a suggested approach to arriving at that response, and then enact that plan, kind of pass that plan back to itself, and enact the plan that it's laid out for itself. Here's an example, just some screenshots from the Thoughts feature in Google's Gemini. So let's say if we're working for a med devices company, we've recently created a new product. It's been very successful in the US. We're considering whether or not it's worth rolling out across the European market or entering into that market in general. So we ask an agentic AI tool that we've built whether we should do that. And rather than immediately saying, yes, you should, and then try to figure out the reasoning for why, or no, you shouldn't, and then figure out the reasoning, it's laying out a plan. It's saying, first, I need to understand the core task. I need to identify key stakeholders, structure the analysis, refine and organize, review and edit. Actually, 5 and 10 we'll come back to in a second. All of that in the process of coming up with this hopefully well-considered analysis on whether we should enter the European market with this product. Review as another pattern. So Trevor referenced Andrew Ng earlier. In a lecture that Andrew Ng gave around this time last year at Sequoia Capital, I thought he had an interesting perspective on review and on planning a bit as well. He said, very roughly paraphrasing, he said, imagine if I asked you to write me an essay and you had to just sit down, start typing, and you need to write out the full paper, and you're never allowed to hit backspace. That's a really hard way to solve a problem. To some extent, no matter how good and big and powerful and advanced our underlying AI models are, if you have a difficult way to solve a problem, you're not going to get the best performance by applying models in that way. Review is this concept of allowing a level of iterative feedback within the model itself or within the system itself. So the model will first write a first draft response. It'll pass it back to itself. It'll consider that draft. It'll think about the strengths and weaknesses of that draft, give feedback to itself on it, and then work through any number of drafts following that apply that feedback, that improve it over time. If the only direction you ever go is forward, it's easy to get stuck in a local minimum. But if you allow yourself to move a little bit, look around, see where you are, think about the steps that you took to get there, and then take a few more steps forward or backward or sideways or whatever it is, it's a lot more likely that you're going to be able to accomplish whatever it is that you set out to do. I talked about those three, so planning, review, and memory. Memory, I think, is a really interesting pattern in agentic AI solutions. A lot of times you're not the first person to have asked a question. Ask the question that you've asked. Somebody's asked it before. Somebody's tried to solve it before. They've probably tried a number of different times to solve it, some more successful than others. And there's probably some information out there that if we knew it when you ask, it'd be really helpful when it comes time to give you an answer. At least of the newest iteration of that problem with whatever details you have. Maybe there are pieces of information that when you're interacting with the solution, you have in the back of your mind, you've shared before, and you just kind of assume, well, everyone should know this. I know this. This is common knowledge. But maybe in this specific interaction, you haven't shared that information. So if there were some way we could incorporate this into our agentic AI systems, that'd be much more helpful context. It would help us think through good and bad ways of solving certain problems, all of those types of things. And that's what memory is. So you can see a screenshot on the left from some functionality ChatGPT actually has been integrating into their UI. So again, kind of simple case, but in their browser, saving small snippets or pieces of information from your conversations with it over time. Different things that it picks up about you. These are all fake, by the way, except for maybe the fourth. I don't have ginger beer or apple cider available for you. But these are things that it's captured about a user over time and thought, when I'm answering this next question, this could be important. Let me keep it in mind and figure out if it's applicable to this case. And if so, then I'll take in that piece of information as well. So that's what's going on. It's saving information across conversations. It's deciding which snippets of information might be useful in solving a specific problem, and then reusing those relevant notes as context. Of course, that would introduce some governance, security challenges, considerations that we'll want to make sure we take into account. So lots more to consider beyond the pattern itself. But really interesting piece of functionality, I think. I have one more demo for you. In this instance, I'll try to incorporate one or two more of those important patterns that we've talked about so far. And it also kind of highlights that agentic AI is not just for process automation. It's not just workflows as you might think about them within the organization that you're trying to automate. So I'll cut over to a custom web app here that we've built. Again, any interface, but in this case, it's web app. It'll feel similar to Claude Desktop. It is just sitting on top of this agentic AI model. One thing to note, I think, over the course of this demo, we've designed it to be a little bit more verbose than you might actually expect in a end user facing solution. In that, we'll want to see a little bit of its reasoning. Some of that you might hide over time, especially as people start to trust models a little bit more and more. Might be useful to just clean up, just get rid of. We also have a settings tab here where we can see that we can switch out different models that we might run this on, a little bit of that optionality that we talked about, and different tool sets that we could equip with it, equip the system with. So again, probably stuff you wouldn't show to a user, but maybe something that's intelligently deciding what kind of model to use based on the question that's asked. If it's a really complicated question, you might need a much more powerful but maybe expensive model. If it's something simpler, maybe you can run it on something that's a bit faster, a bit cheaper. Or the tool sets, maybe we could tie that to user profiles when they log in, something like that. So again, I can interact with this just like any large language model, but in this case, I'll ask for show me a sales summary. Let's say I work as a sales manager, and we have a standard report that I'll call a sales summary here. That's pretty important for looking at sales across geographies. In this case, I'll focus on maybe one that's in my remit. I'll say sales summary for Spain. Whoops. Let me try to just refresh this. Probably let it time out. So it's realized based on what we're asking, again, a little bit of that verbosity, is that a word? Of what it's doing under the hood. It's saying, I'll scroll up. You've asked me for a sales summary. We have a function built out for running sales summaries. This is a standard question that people are asking. I don't want any creative license in interpreting what our standard sales summary is. When somebody asks for that, it's these set of SQL queries that you should execute. It is the data back in this format that you should provide to the user. So it's actually what it is doing is calling a stored procedure in SQL that executes on our underlying data, executes on Databricks Unity Catalog to pull back, like I said, this standard set of information. And then it's doing, this is probably more the user facing part of it, doing a little bit of formatting on top of it so we can read it. So here's a sales summary for Spain, breakout by product line across a couple different metrics, volume, value, COGS, a couple of highlights that it wants to bring to our attention that we might consider. But maybe we want to ask a question that it doesn't just have a pre-canned report for. So maybe I see something interesting in there across a product line, and I want to see how that's performing across customers or something. So I say, give me a sales breakdown with the same metrics for Spain by customer. Let's see what that does. So in this case, it's calling this Ask for Data tool, which is another tool that we've equipped our Agentic AI model with. And this one's a little bit more open. It's trying to understand the context. It's trying to understand the data that's passed back to us so far. It's trying to understand the question that we've asked most recently. It's actually passing that stuff to Databricks Genie, which is coming up with an appropriate SQL query that matches the specific question that we've asked. So a little bit more creative license, if you will, in thinking about what are you asking, what data would support answering that question, how can we bring that back and incorporate it into a response that I'm going to be interested in. So breakdown by customer, top 10 customers by sales value, by volume, as well as a couple of other key insights. And then we can keep going maybe on that spectrum of allowing some creativity. I can just say, what are 4 analyses I haven't run yet, but should? Giving it pretty wide open range for thinking about the different types of things that I could consider here. And it's coming up with some ideas based on what it's seen so far with Spain. So a cross-country performance comparison. How is Spain performing versus other countries? Trying to put some of this information in context. What else does it come up with? Brand performance analysis, a few others, and some recommendations on why you might want to include those. So under the hood, it's doing these things. It's doing some of this planning. It's doing some of this review. It's passing back information from the responses that it's gotten so far and thinking about what are the next steps that I should be taking to solve this type of problem. As far as memory, I could say, what actions have I taken previously, and what future actions should I take? Oops. Forgot a question mark, but it'll figure it out. And this is that concept of memory. It's pulling back questions that people have asked before. It's pulling back analyses that I've run, maybe analyses that other users have run if we set it up to be able to do that or have access to that information. And recapping some of those analyses, it said, well, you've looked at you scheduled a follow-up meeting with the Netherlands sales team in some previous interaction. You ran the standard sales summaries for Germany and Netherlands, Austria, Portugal, so a couple of other countries. Here are ones that you should take going forward. So over the next couple of months, consider these things. So again, that concept of keeping track of the things that people are doing and using all of that as helpful information in answering a question. Right. Again, coming back to these patterns, we saw augmenting our process flow with calling additional tools, kind of in both of those use cases. We saw trying to think about how to solve problems more intelligently through planning and review and memory up on the screen. And there are two others here, multi-agent and human in the loop. I won't go into tons of detail on those, but multi-agent is essentially this concept of incorporating multiple reasoning models into our agentic AI architecture. So maybe they're providing multiple different perspectives on planning and review, or kind of allowing them to bounce ideas off each other, dynamically selecting which models are used. I talked about like choosing the best model for that specific application. Maybe allowing us to save the use of our biggest and most powerful but most expensive models accessible for our toughest problems. Human in the loop. Maybe we have certain edge cases within a business process where we want those to get flagged to us for review. It's hard to say what exactly should be done. We think it'll take a guess, but we're not sure how comfortable we feel with that. So we're going to make sure that it flags to us for review, input, make sure we give some direction on how we want it to proceed. It's kind of an important pattern that can help with adoption as well. If part of a process feels too nuanced or maybe too sensitive to leave just to a model, you can make sure that humans are involved in that, and then try to automate some of the other pieces that you feel comfortable with the model handling. Maybe that overall is a concept that will start to challenge over time, but in the meantime, that's no problem for these models to handle. Maybe a scary way to think about it is human in the loop is just the idea that we are yet another tool that can be called in that tool calling process. It can reach out to us for input and review. A little bit ironic, I guess, that I started the session saying agentic AI is just another tool within our toolbox, and I'm finishing it up by saying we are just another tool in agentic AI's toolbox. So I don't know, I'll move on. I'll conclude by coming back to this same framework, the both ends into the middle approach. Throughout the session, we hopefully got a little bit of a better understanding of agentic AI and important patterns within agentic AI. But we need to keep it in perspective of being grounded by the combination of business cases and the data that we have available. Because agentic AI is another tool, granted a really interesting and powerful one, but it is another tool within our toolbox that we can use to bring us and our questions and our business cases together with the data that we have to support those questions. So over the course of this session, we got to see some kind of hypothetical use cases and demos, which hopefully, like I said, were interesting, but it'll be great to move from those to a real world example of AI implementation in our next session from Robbie.